The time is finally here for my thoughts and my review on Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. To preface this, I watched it last night and I watched it in a fairly crowded theater of about maybe 40 to 50 people. And let's just say that for me personally, I was holding back tears by the end, and when I got back into my car in the parking lot, I just had to let it out, and I cried for a good 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll explain why here in a bit. But first, I kind of just want to get out of the way a lot of kind of the initial things that I think most mainstream reviewers are talking about, and one that it's 3.5-ish hours. But I would argue that it doesn't drag, unlike The Irishman did, but it continues to keep going and going. And so it isn't a chore to sit through. It's actually, you're able to sit through it and everything. So that was fine. Everything else, like craft-wise, meaning like the actual filmmaking, is amazing. Now, the production design was really good. They really were able to mix the historiosity with the authenticity of like the Osage people, how they dressed, how they talked, portraying some of the ceremonies and a lot of the cultural norms. Like it was just it was kind of like Prey, where like everything was just part of the world. You didn't question it. It was just there. It was a part of everyday life. And the performances. Now, of course, mostly everybody's talking about De Niro and DiCaprio, but like that's kind of a given, in everywhere else. But Lily Gladstone really does hold the fort down this entire film. Of course, in my trailer reviews, I was glad to hear that in some of the earlier reviews of it, right? But it was nice to see it. It was nice to see how Lily really held it down. Now, I will get to her representation later in the spoiler section. Everything that I'm saying is spoiler free so far. But warning, I am going to go full spoilers into this because it matters to the rest of my thoughts on the review of this film. But other notable native performances that I thought were great was Tonto Cardinal. And she had a scene that just really hit me hard, where I was tearing up too, but she did a great job. Of course, we've seen more of her in Smoke Signals and Dances with Wolves in the past, but the way she was, I really appreciated her character. And then Cara Jade Myers, she did an amazing job, as well as Anna, Molly's sister. She did an amazing job. She was just she was one of my favorite characters. And then William Below, who plays Henry, and he has some pretty intense scenes where he is his character mentions that he is a melancholic, and you really feel that, and his performance definitely reminded me of like what happens to a lot of men, native men on the reservation, off the reservation, who look to drinking for any type of remedy, right? He kind of, I don't want to say he channeled that, but his performance and his character situation just reminded me of that. And then finally, my homie Tatanka Means, his character was a character that I'm seeing a lot of. It's the native FBI character, and he is based on a real life person who was definitely a part of the Osage investigation. And I don't know what his tribal affiliation was. We just know that he was part native. And Tatanka Means really played his character really well. I thought his performance was pretty solid. So overall, like on a performance level, everything was great. DiCaprio and De Niro, like everyone, you can go watch any other reviews where they're comparing and talking about it, but it's kind of a given that they're going to be fine, The other thing too that I thought was interesting, like I mentioned the production design, but like it was the attention to detail and a lot of the cultural norms for the Osage people that were just presented as everyday things, that it was part of the world, and then the language was a part of that. There's actually a really cool dynamics of bilingualism happening here, where a lot of the Osage people, they're just speaking their native language, but then they alternate, between English. And then even a lot of the white people who are intermarrying or living with them, they speak Osage. And William Hale, who De Niro plays, is pretty fluent in Osage, which kind of digs a little deeper into his sinister machinations, right? The other thing that I really thought was cool was Robbie Robertson's score. He's really subtle with his score, and he kind of allowed himself to play around with different sounds and moods and everything, but his score definitely made it feel, Scorsese gangster-ish, Goodfellas-like, but it didn't detract. It wasn't too distracting, and it wasn't like too noticeable, and it just helped inform the film. And I am just glad that Robbie Robertson's last big project was a native-themed film. I'm just happy that that's the case. If you don't know who Robbie Robertson, and he's a pretty influential musician in the rock and blues world, and he is Mohawk. The documentary Rumble, he's actually a pretty central figure in that documentary, but he scored a few of Scorsese's films, actually. Now I'm getting into spoilers, because everything here, let me now that I'm getting into spoilers, because I feel like I was putting on my filmmaking hat, but the things that I'm talking about now, I feel like are a little bit more grounded with kind of the indigenous and native perspective. So there were a few scenes that really got to me and spoke to me on a very personal level, and a few of them were really nice, and others that were just heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching. The first one for me was, the opening scene was very interesting. I really thought that was a good tone setter. How they bury the pipe, they mourn the pipe. For a lot of those tribes, and especially the Osage, the pipe is considered like a living being, like a person. And this pipe represented basically their old ways, that they were mourning the fact that we're no longer going back. This is the death of something. Very reverent scene, but very well directed, obviously, and it really set the tone. And then we get the whole montage of the oil bursting. We get Robbie Robertson's score really kind of coming in there, and it was a pretty good tone setter for where the Osage were at that point. The one scene that really it was the first tear-jerking scene, and it probably wasn't like this for non-native audiences, but it hit me. It was another ancestor type scene, very much like in Reservation Dogs season 2, but it was with Lizzie Q, who Tonto Cardinal plays, Molly's mother. She's dying, and as she's dying, she opens her eyes, and the first thing she sees is some of her ancestors. And I'm guessing the two other people, the man and the woman that she saw, I am guessing that that's her parents. I don't know who the man is who greeted her and held his hand out. I don't know. That scene was just touching. It was something that I personally would like to see, more of that. It was touching, it was sweet, it was reverent, it was quiet. And then you cut back to Molly and her sisters, and they're just crying. That was a good scene. I loved that scene. It in the midst of all the death that was happening, that was like a little small refresher of some bliss. But the other scenes were, I'll talk more about, I guess, the killings and the violence, but there were a few that were pretty brutal. Henry's death was brutal. Rita's death was, it doesn't pull back on the reality of the whole thing. And then finally the ending. And the ending is what did it for me. And I'll talk more about the ending here in a bit, but I'm talking about the radio show, the true crime radio show thing. And then we get Scorsese himself coming in and talking about Molly. And then the very last shot is of the powwow that's happening at the end. That overhead shot, and it just going out. And the end, I'm gonna talk more about that here in a bit because it matters to the context of everything else. But those are some scenes that really stuck out to me as an Indigenous viewer, that they were both harrowing and depressing as hell. But also just, I mean, the very last scene in Lizzie Q's death were just, there were some blankets of comfort for me personally. So now I want to get into talking about thematic elements and criticism. I know there's a lot of criticism. I have criticisms. Some Osage people have had criticisms, but I kind of want to address that and contextualize kind of the whys of why I think Scorsese did what he did. There's been a lot of criticism, and I agree with this criticism, but I think the criticisms are different. But the main criticism is that there isn't too much of the Osage perspective. Now, this is coming from a lot of native viewers, but actually non-native viewers as well. Surprisingly, there's a lot of mainstream, non-native reviewers out there who kind of wish that we saw more of the Osage perspective. And I agree. I feel like we could have seen more of Molly's family, her dynamic. I kind of wanted to see a little bit more into how the Osage people were reacting to these murders, because there really was a broad sense of paranoia within the community and for the tribe. Like, they were freaking out. You only get glimpses of it when, like, you see after Rita and her husband dies in the bombing, a few Osage people are packing up and just leaving, right? We don't get that sense of paranoia throughout the community. I wish we had saw that a little bit more. The same goes for Tatanka Mean's character, who he infiltrates, the tribe in a way to really get their perspectives on the murders. And maybe he, like, because he's an undercover FBI agent, he's pulling another Jim Chi and Thunderheart here. He's infiltrating to be able to kind of get an idea and get close to the community and just kind of understand, like, what do the Osage know? What do they think is happening? Who could be doing this? What are they feeling? But this is kind of, the more I read about it, the more I've been seeing people's reactions, and the ending is really telling me why Scorsese and Eli Roth chose this new direction. So if you watch my original teaser trailer reaction, I played different clips from the Cannes Film Festival, and Scorsese mentions this, that they were originally going to do the whole thing from the FBI's perspective. It was going to be Tom White, who Jesse Plemons plays. The whole thing was going to be going in from the FBI only and taking down these guys and all of that. But one is that, I mean, this is a criticism I see from people who haven't even seen the film, of the like, oh, it's just another white savior movie. It's definitely not a white savior movie. But the original script was leading into that white saviorism territory, where, the good old FBI comes in and solves the crime, right? And DiCaprio was going to originally play Tom White's character, but they actively sought to kind of get away from that. De Niro even mentions that in the Cannes Festival. He's like, we've seen this too much. We've seen too many of these white savior-like stories. But the other reason why I think they also chose to show this from Ernest's perspective, to kind of give some contextual stuff. Like, Ernest is hardly in the book. He's just there. He's convicted, right? But what I thought, why the film chose to go from Ernest's perspective. And now this is going to go into, I guess, some media literacy stuff. A lot of people confuse protagonists for the hero. There's a huge difference. In film, or in any story, you have a protagonist. And sometimes, yes, your protagonist is the hero of the story. You root for this person. I'm thinking Breaking Bad. At first, yes, he is our hero. We start rooting for him. But towards the end, you kind of don't. You're not supposed to, at least, or plenty of other characters throughout film. Nightcrawler, American Psycho, like, these are characters that are pretty messed up in the head, but we're seeing everything from their perspective, and the filmmakers are kind of given an attempt to kind of have us see, like, where they're coming from and why. And I guess for me, it's like, who better to show the banality and evil and white supremacy of this whole conspiracy and through their perspective than Scorsese, because he does that. Goodfellas, Mean Streets, I mean, Wolf of Wall Street. Like, these people are just morally reprehensible and just bad people, right? But we're seeing their perspective. And Scorsese doesn't try, like, he does a little bit in Wolf of Wall Street where they're a bit idolized. I'm kind of defending Scorsese here, but it makes sense. Like, Scorsese has a history of showcasing the inner machinations of evil white men. And to me, it makes sense that why he would choose this stance to show this, because one of the consultants, he mentions that he has the same critiques that I have about, you know, having more of the Osage perspective. But he did say that this film wasn't made for the Osage.
As an Osage, I really wanted this to be from the perspective of Molly and what her family experienced. I think it would take an Osage to do that. Martin Scorsese, not being Osage, I think he did a great job representing our people. But this story is being told, this history is being told almost from the perspective of Ernest Burkhart. And they kind of give him this conscience, and they kind of depict that there's love. But when somebody conspires to murder your entire family, that's not love. That's not love. That's just beyond abuse. I think in the end, the question that you can be left with is, how long will you be complacent with racism? How long will you go along with something and not say something, not speak up? How long will you be complacent? And I think that's because this film was not made for an Osage audience. It was made for everybody not Osage. For those that have been disenfranchised, they can relate. But for other countries, you know, that have their acts and their histories of oppression, this is an opportunity for them to ask themselves this question of morality. And so that's how I feel.
This film was made for everyone else, particularly Americans. And this is why I feel the ending definitely helps us inform this, that Scorsese is putting a mirror up to America and its history. Because the ending, I mean, from my filmmaking cinephile fanboy, was amazing. Like, it was great. But he presents the whole story like in this kind of like a true crime radio show, like in the 1920s, where people are reading off a dramatized thing of the whole thing. And it's like, it's really meta, because the show is like this radio show. It's like exaggerated, and it's got music, and it dramatizes and sensationalizes the whole mystery and the murders. I mean, the whole because this whole ending sequence is what you would see in a pretty typical historical drama, where you get a black card and you have like the photos of all these people, and it says, you know, like the updates of what happened after the movie, right? But we get this really genius you know, radio show thing. But he comes in and reads what happens about Molly, and talking about how she remarried, divorced Ernest, and at her funeral there was no talk of the murder. Like, you get this curb stomp of reality, that like there was really no justice served with this story. And that's what he was trying to go home with when talking about the banality of all the evil, the banality of their conversations, like De Niro's conversations with Ernest and all these other white people in this community, was on a similar vein of the violence and the murders.
She won't last. Most Osage don't live past 50. With these women dying, with how Osage suffer from illness, you have to make it the head rights come to you. You see?
The violence and the murders didn't stretch too much into sensationalism. When people die, you literally don't expect it. There's no fanfare, there's no music. There's a gunshot. Pop, literally the popping sound of a gun, and the person dies. And it's usually done in wide shots, medium shots. You don't get like a dramatic close-up or like any of that. The violence and the death of these people, mostly Indigenous women, was banal. It was grounded, and it was just like almost like the way Scorsese portrayed it. It was like an everyday thing for these people, just like the conversations, like the conversations that William Hale has with Ernest, about Henry. Like he talks about him like he's some sort of cow, like he's an asset. He's not a human being. And I think that's what Scorsese was trying to do with this. He didn't want to sensationalize it, although marketing is going to try to, but that's to get people in just to watch the damn thing. Because if I understand like what Scorsese was trying to do, it was to hold a mirror up to America and say, this is how easy it is to be complicit in evil and white supremacy. This is how everyone was involved, because they show that like in real life. It was everybody in the county. It was the magistrates, it was the police, it was everybody. It was deeply rooted. You see, it's shown in that scene in the trailer. But he's like, this story is, I need you people to understand that this is a part of our history. These people were complicit. And by default, a lot of people who don't speak out on, racial and any type of prejudice and injustice are complicit as well. And what really got to me was that ending. Like I knew the outcomes of all of these people's lives, but that presentation for me, I felt like Scorsese was like curb stomping me into the ground, and it hit me emotionally. But then the last shot right after that is the drum circle panning out to the powwow and the dancing, and like it was a beautiful period and a long essay that reminded me that like, yeah, all of that happened to the Osage people, but they are still here. Like despite all of that, they're still there. Kind of like for me, when I remember more about the Navajo Long Walk, I remember about Massacre Cave over at Canyon de Chelly, the Scorched Earth campaign against the Navajo people, and then later on with the uranium mining. We're still here. Yeah, we have less than 1 million enrolled members, or non-enrolled even still, that identify as Navajo, but like we're still here. And that it was like a mixture of like dread but hope. But then another thing, the dread came back because I was in this screening and the film ended and the credits are rolling with this honor song that's playing. I think it's an honor song. And everyone just gets up. And I'm like, of course, I don't expect them to stay and all that. But like, there were some comments I heard from people that really pissed me off. And like, I heard a girl up front. She goes, "Oh man, can you imagine if that was a true story?" Oh, like it just. And I wish they would have I wish Scorsese would have kind of put forth a little bit more that yes, this was a true story. And the other thing too was showcase the scope of how many people actually died, because of this limited perspective, we only see a handful of people who died, but there were a lot more people who died, and I wish they would have showcased that more in the film. And then I heard some guy behind me, he's like, another anti-white movie, and I guess those comments like pissed me off the most was because you didn't pay attention. This is what Scorsese was trying to do. He was holding up a mirror. The ending, he was trying to do that at the ending, and that's what got to me was like, how else are people gonna learn, And this has reminded me what happened in a particular town in Germany, and there was a concentration camp locally, and the American military came in, liberated it. But what was fascinating is that they forced all of the civilians to look at the conditions and the survivors and the corpses and all the just depraved that the Nazis were doing to those people. They made the civilians go and look and basically tell them that, like, this is what was happening. This is what, this is what the regime that you voted for and that you were perpetuating and upholding. This is what they were doing, and therefore you yourself were complicit in all of this. And like the Nazis, the Ernest and his uncle were all just the banality of it all was just harrowing. The violence against these people was so just nonchalant to these people. I think Scorsese tried to pay some respect to the victims by not sensationalizing the violence and sensationalizing the crimes, making the violence just straight and blunt. And this leads me to like Ernest as well. You're not supposed to feel sorry for Ernest. You're supposed to see that like he's a scumbag. He was an asshole. And Scorsese's trying to tell us that like, yeah, he's conflicted, but he still did all these things. And did he love Molly? I think a part of him did. I think a part of him loved the idea of her. But if you truly love somebody, you don't poison them, or you don't like go out and like murder their family. That's not love. That's some sort of sick, twisted. It's just f***ed up. And so I guess that's my take on the film. This film wasn't meant to. It wasn't for the Osage people. It was meant to honor them and respect, how they have survived this legacy of violence and death. But in my opinion, it's more for everyone else to check themselves and remind themselves that, like, am I complicit in the oppression of other people by not, by indulging it or by ignoring it? I guarantee you, a lot of people in Osage County, the white people, who, may not have been directly involved in the murders, but they probably knew about it. It's really, the film actually kind of shows through all of the white people's conversations that there was just this underlying, like, unspoken sense of like, we're getting in. Like, there's one of the characters who married an Osage woman talks to Ernest, and he leans in him and he goes, yeah, she's full blood, and goes into blood quantum, and I can go a whole rant about blood quantum myself, but yeah, when I was in my car crying my eyes out, like, it was a mixture of just rage, catharsis, hopelessness. It was like a mixture of it all. I had a hard time compartmentalizing those emotions. I just had to let it out in my car. I was beside myself, right? But I had a little bit more time to think on it. And if you want to see another Indigenous perspective, there's some reviews on Vincent Schilling has a review. There's another review on A Tribe Called Geek, but this is just my opinion about it. And I guess it's like, for the 3.5 hour runtime, if you can't sit and watch, for Native people, this might be hard to watch. But I think this wasn't particularly made for Native people. It's a Native themed project, right? If you can't sit for 3.5 hours of looking at the violence of white supremacy, you're the type of people who needs to watch it. That's just me. This kind of goes into me, to also the idea of, like, a lot of people are like, how come the Osage didn't make this movie? How come the Osage Nation didn't, have someone, like, again, this goes back to what I talked about in my teaser trailer. If we did, it would have been like a PBS style documentary, and that has a very limited audience. Scorsese is already having a hard enough time to get people to watch a 3.5 hour movie. But in my opinion, like, one, this was a passion project for him, but two, for him, I think this is an important story to tell. And he wants people to watch it, to be like, this is what we as humans are capable of doing, and you need to check yourself. And we need to teach this in our American history. I've been seeing lots of comments in different areas about people, Oklahomans, who were never taught about this history or the Tulsa City Massacre in their Oklahoman history. We have to find out, like, people learned about the Tulsa City Massacre through the Watchmen TV show on freaking HBO. That's how people learned about it. They didn't learn about it through a history book, you know. And these days, like, people try to get their history on TikTok, which is good and bad in my opinion. But like, the accessibility of this information, you know, yeah, like it's like, it's easier in certain circles online, but like for the broader audience, like people across the world are going to learn more about this. That's why, again, if you watch my other video about like the industry and everything, it's like the broader the accessibility and like viewership, the easier it is for people to watch this and intake it and get what Scorsese is trying to get out to people. So if there was an Osage filmmaker to do this, that Osage filmmaker would have to be, I don't think they would be Osage. They would have to be someone like Sterling Harjo or Taika Waititi or Sidney Freeland or Billy Luther or Black Horse Lowe, you know, Erica Tremblay. But guess what? This is just my personal opinion, and I have to ask around to other Native filmmakers. But if you look at the content and films that Indigenous filmmakers are usually making, it isn't period stuff. It's contemporary looks into the lives of Natives now. And I think it's because of the history of Native representation in period pieces. I think that takes away from a lot of Native filmmakers because they don't want to like participate in that in a way. But at the same time, it's like, if you pressure these filmmakers to make these historical pieces, it's like, it's hard. Even me already, like, there's some Native artists out there who want to make their content and make their art, but they automatically feel pressured to be an activist in some sort of way. And you can argue that like we have to be, and others are like, no, I just want to make my art. I don't want to have to be burdened with like every single thing that I have to talk about has to go back to the activism, right? And I feel like a lot of Native filmmakers, they do that in their own way. Reservation Dogs did a lot of that subtly, you know, like with the boarding school episode, right? Again, Bones of Crows by Marie Clements is like one of those very few Native run projects that go into the past and talking about something traumatic in the past. Like, I thought about myself, I'm like, would I go out and make a Navajo long walk movie? Would I be, you know, like, and it goes all the way to the purpose of film and media. Is it meant to be escapist? Is it meant to be cathartic? Is it meant to inform? And of course, in my opinion, especially with recent days of what's happening right now with Israel and Palestine, you get certain content creators who are telling us to stay off the news for your own mental health, right? And it's just like what probably the people in Osage County did back then. Oh, don't worry about the murders. Just, you know, don't worry about it. You'll be fine. You know, like don't think too hard on it. And then when you stop caring, or when you stop questioning and interrogating a lot of the injustices that are happening, you become complicit. That was long-winded. It was a rant, I know, but that's what I have to say about it. This felt like my take on Hereditary, the horror film. Perfectly directed film, effective in its horror. May or may not watch it again. I know it was heavy, but this is the thing. I recommend you watch it. That's just me. And if you are Native, I know for a fact a lot of Native people are gonna watch it regardless because it's Natives in film, and Natives love to watch other Natives on film. I hope Lily Gladstone gets nominated for an Academy Award for this. I really do. She just knocked it out of the park on this one. That's it for now. I'm in the middle of doing my review for Reservation Dogs Season 3. There's something pretty exciting happening over on Indigenous Talk. Follow Patrick on Instagram and YouTube here on Indigenous Talk. I'll see you guys in the next one.